Hi, my name is Corey Malone, and I am a teacher at the International Community School of Addis Ababa in sunny Ethiopia, where I teach grade 7 social studies. And this is a video reflection of my final project for COTAIL, my Course 5 final project, which I taught here at ICS. So just a quick disclaimer, I actually plan to use an entirely different unit for my Course 5 final project, and we're seeing the UBD Atlas Planner for it there on the screen now. It revolved around our 7th grade Week Without Walls trip to the Omo Valley in southern Ethiopia, a very remote place populated by isolated and very diverse ethnic groups. And for years, our grade 7 students have been going to the Omo Valley to work with one of those ethnic groups known as the Konso. And this year, the grade 7 team and I worked together to revamp the unit, to make it more interdisciplinary, to give it a stronger service learning component, and to add a more PBL aspect to it. Specifically, the problem was, how do we preserve culture in a modernizing world? And this is very relevant to the Konso because Konso is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And there are ongoing problems as the government is trying to modernize the area economically by building a dam and developing numerous agricultural projects and displacing a lot of those ethnic groups down there. But this year things got worse as a drought broke out, and then flooding followed that, and then protests broke out against the government policies. And well, the security situation gradually deteriorated. And eventually, the political leader of the Konso was arrested, and then the protests got worse. So the school abruptly canceled our trip, which also put me in a predicament because Course 5 had already begun, and the trip was canceled only 2 weeks before we were scheduled to fly down to the Omo Valley. So I was confronted with the question, what do I do now? Fortunately, I was scheduled to begin our unit on Islam after Week Without Walls. So when Week Without Walls was canceled, it enabled me to accelerate the beginning of the Islam unit. And the Islam unit is really just an excellent unit. It has really strong content. It has great writing and research skills integrated into it. And it has a really fun collaborative project at the end. We see here the Islam from A to Z project. And it was wide open for tech integration, so it was just ideal for COTAIL. So all was not lost. So tech integration was not limited to the project. It actually began with the pre-assessment for the unit. I required students to upload their pre-assessments to their e-portfolios for student-led conferences, and I really just asked them what they knew about Islam. And the reason I chose this unit for the growth component of the student-led conference and portfolio was that you'll find that students know very little about Islam. This is why it's a great unit of study, has really strong content, and at the end they upload their projects and all these other things, and they get to see their own growth. So the culminating project for this unit is pretty cool and had a great deal of potential. Ultimately, the students were going to work in groups and create children's books, the A to Z of Islam, for 3rd and 4th grade classrooms. So, A is for Arabic, B is for Baghdad, and then they'd have to write a paragraph about each topic and have an accompanying picture. And then they would read their books once they're finished to 3rd and 4th grade classrooms. The problem was it wasn't very techy. They're paper books that they were making, and they were limited to the school by being hard copies. So my feeling was digital was the way to go for this. The problem was I had no experience making ebooks, and this is where my PLN came to save me. I immediately went to the Twitter sphere asking people for sites or apps that could help me make an ebook, and it was a fellow co-tailer, Kate Hall, who replied right away. I didn't take Kate's advice in the end because I consulted our tech coach, and he said, look, Corey, we're going Google School. Every kid has a Google account. They all have a Google Drive. So use that. Use the Google Slides. Use the Google Drive for them to collaborate. It would make it a lot easier to share the books afterwards with whoever you want to assess those books. So that's what I did. He made me a Google Slide template that was formatted to be the same size as A4 paper, and then I shared that with my students for them to use as a template for their book pages. Now that I figured out how to make an ebook, my next step was to find an audience to evaluate my ebook, and I went back to my PLN for that as well. I asked two former colleagues who work in Cairo and Kuwait to see if they could help me out, and they put me in touch with the religion teachers of their school. And the religion teachers agreed to evaluate the books for content and for cultural appropriateness, and that would be a feedback session for my kids before they finally publish their books as hard copies and as e-books. So the first step was to get my students to brainstorm words for their books. So I made them this organizer here, and they worked on it in Google Docs together. First they did it individually at home, and then as groups they decided on the final list of their words and then divvied up the words amongst the groups. So everyone got a certain number of letters, usually about 6 letters per person, to research. So as I mentioned earlier, research skills are a big part of this project. And the last research project my students completed, they didn't do very well in the research. And one of the big complaints I heard from the students was that we used Noodle tools for that project, and they just didn't like it. They found it confusing. Now, I had used Noodle tools in the past with my high school class, and I liked it, and the high school students didn't mind it, but for some reason it was just a little too much for the 7th graders. So what I did was I created a research template and rubric for this project that still addressed the same skills, the same research skills as the last project, but kind of condensed everything into one document that was really easy to use and easy to find their way around. And I got pretty good results out of it, which we'll see afterwards. But so what we see here in this first column is the letter and the word. So for example, A is for Arabic. Remember, they're writing a children's book about Islam. So they put the word that they're writing about in that particular column. The second one is crucial because inquiry is a big push at our school. And just the simple ability to generate questions is really, really big, because as they get to the IB level in high school, they have to generate some pretty big research questions. So I always challenge my students to break down a topic into smaller questions. So in this column, they would take the word that they're studying and then ask themselves, what does the audience need to know about this particular topic? Specifically, what are the who, what, when, where, why, and even how questions that they need to ask and answer to be able to become experts in this topic. This next column here is prior knowledge, because they've already studied quite a bit about Islam. And then I put this here because a lot of students like copying and pasting, and I want to discourage them from doing that. So what I told them for this next column was, you took what you already know, you can take the stuff that you copied and pasted, but this is really the synthesis column. This is where you write a paragraph or maybe more, combining what you know and what you learned from your research into your own words. And then here was the citation column where they would put in their citation. And the students said they prefer EasyBib over Noodle tools, so that's what I allowed them to use. Now, some students asked if they could use Noodle tools, and I let them do that. To be honest, it's all the same skills, but most students elected to use this research organizer. Now we see at the bottom, they had to get pictures for their books as well. So I required them to use Creative Commons licensed images, or they could use Wikimedia Commons as well. And you'll see in this particular column that it says URL or complete citation for the image. The idea is that I really want to encourage them to get in the habit of citing things as opposed to just putting in hyperlinks or URLs. So if they wanted the exemplary for research ethics, they not only had to cite all of their information, but they also had to cite all of their images. So it worked well. What I did find was, as they're building the books, that copying and pasting pictures here and then putting the citation here wasn't helpful. They really were better off saving the images in a separate folder somewhere, because they were uploading them into Google Docs, and it just was more useful to have them saved as opposed to copying and pasting. And then at the bottom we see the rubric, and we see the question development, which is part of the table above. The variety of sources, I required them to use at least 3 reliable sources that were a mix of different types of sources to get a proficient. The research ethics that I mentioned earlier, and then the information. But overall, the feedback I got from the students on this particular table and rubric was pretty positive. How did you find the research for this project compared to the last project?
I felt the research was much easier because EasyBib, all you needed was the URL, the person who published it, and other stuff. And for Noodle tools, it was pretty hard because you had to click a lot of buttons to get there. then the options are pretty confusing.
Okay, so you didn't like Noodle Tools. So before we could begin making the books, I felt it was important for the kids to learn what a children's book sounds like. It's tough to write in a kid-friendly voice and for informational purposes. So we went through a bunch of nonfiction children's books that were written about the same level as they were writing their books. And I felt like it would be valuable to spend about 20 minutes doing that for each class. So after that, the students just got to work in their groups building their books, and they used Google Docs, Drive, and Slides to do so. And to be honest, I've done this project. This is the third year I've done it. And I'm very pleased with the results for this. It's not just cool because they're digital and it gives them a little more flexibility for their designs and their patterns, but also it made it a lot more authentic because the students knew that actual Muslim students in other countries who were studying religion were going to evaluate these for accuracy. So I felt like the quality of the work was there and the visual appeal was just that much better with the Google Slides. And here we see the rubric that I sent to Cairo and Kuwait to the religion classes there who are evaluating my students' books. The religion classes are only evaluating the books for content. They want to make sure that everything is accurate and also related to Islam, that the connection is explained, but also the images, because we want to make sure that the images are respectful and culturally appropriate. They did get them last week. The books were shared last week. So they haven't been fully graded yet, but I expect to get them back this week. And once we do that, they use this feedback to put the finishing touches on their books, to fix any issues, and then to publish them as formal ebooks, and then also to make hard copies for the 3rd and 4th grade libraries here at ICS. So the best place to begin reflecting on my final project for Coattail is really with my students' own reflections, because after all, the goal of all of this is to become a better teacher so our students get more from our classes. And it was great because I had students uploading all their work into their e-portfolios for student-led conferences for this unit. So I was able to look at their growth, and really it allows me to reflect on my own teaching. And unfortunately, the books weren't published by the time they were putting their portfolios together, but the research was done. And that was perhaps the biggest thing for me, was that the majority of my students exceeded or met expectations for grade 7 research skills, which was much more than I could say for the last project. So there was a great deal of growth there. And we see the student did very well on the summative assessment for the unit, so it took away a lot of new content knowledge, and also it did exceedingly well on writing her book introduction. That was one of the major writing assignments. So overall, there's definite evidence that my students took away quite a bit from this, and that's probably the most important thing to me. Meanwhile, in terms of my own ability to integrate technology into my instruction, at first glance this project didn't seem that dazzling or dynamic. But as I looked at the SAMR model and reflected on it, I realized that it was definitely somewhere between modification and redefinition. Sure, I was redesigning something using Google Slides, which isn't that exciting, but I was also doing something I'd never done before. I was using Google Drive to share work with somebody across the world, an audience across the world who would evaluate my students' work. And that was a big deal for me, because I just never thought that would have been possible years ago. And it wouldn't have been possible without the help of my personal learning network, which was another big takeaway from Coattail for me. Using social media, I was able to reconnect with former colleagues who put me in touch with their current colleagues and who provided my students with an audience of experts to evaluate their work. And I felt like they worked that much harder because of it. And perhaps that's the big takeaway from Coattail for me. It wasn't so much that I became a tech guru, a master of new apps and new software. It was more of that exercise and reflection. It got me asking myself as I responded to other people's blogs and read the readings every week, how I could tweak what I already do with technology to make my teaching and my students' learning that much more meaningful to them. And that's a big deal for somebody like me who still only types with one finger.